Contrary to popular belief, people, tequila is not good for your health. Right, Al? Just nod your head. We'll know you're alive.
Recently, we took a look at Crysis 3 running on the Switch, as well as Crysis 2 running on a PS5. There's more to come, of course, and the official release date is out, but we have one more thing to show before the game is out, and that is Crysis 2 running on the Switch. And to discuss that, this time I felt it was only natural to bring on the Crysis expert himself, Alex Battaglia.
Hey there, John. The shrine is lit. I'm ready to talk about my technically least favorite Crysis.
Yes, but you know, I agree. It's probably the weakest of the 3 or 4 if you count Warhead, but I still like Crysis 2 a lot.
Oh, it's still good.
Seeing this on Switch is pretty cool, right? Now, obviously, this port is not going to stack up against the higher-end console or PC versions.
We don't expect that.
We don't expect that. That was never going to happen. But I think it's worth comparing against what you got on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, because that's kind of what serves as the basis here. But it's not just a straight port or anything. There are some improvements.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of improvements in this one from the footage you've seen. I've seen this technically in person in a build that was older than the one you're looking at here right now. You're looking at what I think is the preview gold version, like you looked at Crysis 3.
It's the Gold Master. So this is the physical cart Gold Master version.
Yeah, so like here, I mean, just let's throw out any of the footage of this game here. Just put Crysis 2 right next to Crysis 2 on the 360 or PS3 here. PS3, actually. And one of the immediate things you'll notice, I think right off the bat, is the difference in lighting mood, and kind of color grading. Right, John?
Yeah, so that's obviously one of the main things, and it's essentially they got Sfogy in there, so it's the sparse voxel.
Good old Spogs.
Yeah, global illumination technique, so that's excellent looking. That basically means that all the indirectly lit areas now actually have, they are actually properly indirectly lit in a way that looks much better. The textures are improved. That's nice as well. The resolution is improved. Anti-aliasing improved. Things like that. But I guess the main thing here when we talk about this is I feel like we need to actually look back more closely at why the PS360 version was so rough. And you know, it comes down to the performance, right? So this is the game running on PS3 and Xbox 360 side by side. As you can see, it's dire. I mean, it is bad.
It is really bad. This is like when we talk about that generation probably being one of the worst for performance. We mean it. You know, this Crysis 2 was the end of the generation kind of game where developers were really limited by almost every single aspect of these systems. And a game like Crysis 2 was having this kind of real-time all the time mantra with the CryEngine at that point in time, CryEngine 3. So it was like real-time shadow maps for everything. They were even trying out real-time global illumination at the time. Didn't make the 360 or PS3 versions of the game, but all that kind of stuff was just not at all fit for the game design of this game on the consoles, and it shows off. We're looking at these earlier footage here of the PS3. For some reason, even though you're not interacting with like the AI and stuff like that, it's still like in the low 20s.
Yeah, but when things start to heat up, it drops like a stone. I mean, this one scene especially was genuinely shocking to see. I mean, 360 drops as low as like 13 frames per second, and it pretty much just hangs in the teens. And that's essentially the problem. Basically, the game already struggles to hold 30 FPS normally, but the second you activate the AI, engage in combat, it just chugs.
Physics.
It's very difficult to play.
It's one of those interesting things too, where like back in the day, I do really wonder how people played this and bought it and what they really thought about it. I mean, people do have some really great memories of Crysis 2, but I'm not sure if it's the console versions. I'm not sure about that.
Games like Far Cry 3 run just as bad, if not worse. So, but so here's the good news then. Switch, jump over to that. I do have one frame rate comparison sequence here, and this is the sort of the tank battle. And this is actually not too bad, I guess, compared to some of the scenes. But as you can see here on PlayStation 3, frame rate is pretty much always under 30 FPS. It's very unstable. On Switch, however, it's mostly a 30 FPS solid frame rate. There is some of the frame pacing stuff that we mentioned in Crysis 3, the same thing that we saw in like Doom Eternal and all that. It does seem to be something with the way that developers are targeting the Switch hardware. essentially to avoid bottlenecking the performance. But I was told, though, that this Gold Master version, the performance that will arrive in the Day 1 patch, has improved even more. So this isn't even the best that the Switch has to offer, but as you can see, PS3 doesn't hold up. Let's look at a few other scenes here. Just general combat, just going around. And that's the main thing. Like, when you actually start to engage the enemies, you can see the performance does not drop like a stone.
No, it's consistent. I mean, due to that slight frame pacing thing, it's not always 100% what we would be like gold standard fluid that we at, Digital Foundry are really always really happy about. But this is light years ahead of what we saw back on the last gen consoles. And that's what we really think is actually the greatest point of comparison here, because you're looking at essentially a low powered mobile device with, older hardware at this point in time, but it's still doing a lot better than what you've previously had access to in the console space in this kind of like form factor here. It's really awesome. I really think this is a really good looking version of the game based upon what John's been showing me here. Another thing that I think that also makes it really great is the improved image quality this time around.
Oh, of course. So this is twofold. Obviously, the older console versions, lower resolution. They also use that older sort of attempt at a TAA that Crytek did, which was actually kind of cutting edge in a way, I would argue.
Completely. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It was cool at the time, but obviously at lower resolutions lower frame rates, you get a lot of ghosting artifacts, and it still doesn't fully clean up all the edges. On Switch, however, now we have an improved TAA, but in addition to that, the actual resolution numbers are better. So now it tops out at 900p, but it can drop as low as like 520p or so. And 720p for portable with drops to around 400 or so. But in general, I find that it stays closer to the between 720 and 900 in docked by and large, and similar sort of thing in portable, which is to say the resolution is generally above what it was on the last gen consoles.
Yeah, you can't forget that. Like last gen, I think it was like 1152p by, I always forget the bottom number there on Xbox 360. And then like the PS3 version was this weird horizontal scaled kind of mess, I want to say, with like the HUD being scaled weirdly. It was like 1024 by 720?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was 1024 by 720. So it's like a very strange output resolution.
Yeah.
And
it sure was, and it shows up there when you look at the game.
But really, I mean, ultimately, that's kind of the point of us just discussing this at this point, is that I think it's neat to see how we've kind of evolved since this. Like, we're about, 10, 11 years, I guess maybe even a little more, removed from the really... I guess it's 10 years since Crysis 2, sorry.
Yeah, it is, actually. Standards have changed,
And it's neat that we can now have an experience that's vastly superior to the console release of that time on a portable system like the Switch.
It's something that you probably would not have expected back then when, CryEngine 3 was essentially the cutting edge thing out there. There was really nothing that looked like it in general, I would say. And then to see just about 10 years later, on slightly older hardware, like Switch isn't the newest, most portable hardware out there, but it's still putting out visuals that look like this. And I think it's actually just awesome.
The fact that it's running better at a higher resolution, and it now has a global illumination solution that was not present in the original. I mean, it just shows how far technology has come, even on... Yeah,
this is something I'm going to when I do get to covering the PC version of this game. I'm going to show basically how big of a deal Svogi is, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be able to do the exact same thing when you cover the eventual version that comes out on Switch, because it adds a lot to Crysis 2's visuals for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes just an absolutely huge deal here, possibly more than even in Crysis 1, I would say, because of the way that the city is designed. There's so many of these shadowed regions. I mean, the large size of the buildings create tons of shadowed spaces, and they were not completely realistically lit.
No, they definitely were.
And on top of that, things like the color grading has been refined and changed. It has a little bit less of that teal orange look to it.
That's something that, even back in the day, it actually did kind of bother me. So I'm so much happier now that, even the Switch 2 version, which is different, I would say, than the next gen versions and the PC versions that we're going to be getting. It's like its own separate thing, as you can tell just by looking at things like the Scar AB, or Scarab as it's called. Its texture is different than the one you might find on the next gen consoles or PC version, but still, like they're muting down that color scheme, making it a little bit less overbearing, which is, something I really like.
Exactly. And you mentioned the rifle change there, and it's true. The assets actually seem closer to the original PC version, perhaps.
That's what it seems like.
So, things like textures and whatnot are higher resolution than the old console versions, but it isn't the newest assets that were created specifically for the other newer console and PC remastered release. So,
yeah.
And I think we've mentioned this before, but the Switch version specifically was done by Saber Interactive in Sweden. So it has its own team working on it. So it is kind of bespoke, if you will.
Yeah, speaking of bespoke stuff, this has also parallax mapping, right? Like
Yes.
If you look at the ground, that's pretty cool. That was something that was only turned on, I think, at the very end of Crysis 1 Remaster's cycle there on Switch, if at all.
It was.
And that was really cool to see there. But now, Crysis 2, the PC version back in the day, had actually quite a lot of parallax occlusion mapping. So you're getting all those textures here on Switch, more or less, just, at a slightly lower resolution.
The only difference I would note that's, possibly less in its favor is that they have changed the way some of the effects look, like specifically depth of field, for instance. It's shallower in the original PS3 60 version of the game. So you get that, in addition to the fact that it's missing the near field depth of field on the weapon, which was included back in the other version. During some of the cutscenes, you just get stronger bokeh shapes in its original incarnation. It's less of a technical difference, I guess, and it's more of just a tweak that they've made for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but that is different. But I mean, as you can gather from this, it is just, I'd say better overall.
Yeah, I'd definitely put it out there. And I think we'll be obviously covering this more completely by the time launch comes around with the post-gold version. I'm presuming there's going to be a day one patch.
There
like
is,
a lot of games I have these days. Then, we'll give it a better look. But I imagine just in this form we've already seen in the gold version, this is something that's going to be pretty special for Switch owners.
Yeah, and I recommend playing it. I do think Crysis 2 is a great game. And in fact, so the thing that makes the Crysis games special, I think, and this is something I want to just highlight, I was thinking about, why do I actually like playing Crysis? I've replayed these levels multiple times. It's actually comparable somewhat to a game like Halo, but with its own twist. What makes it compelling is the fact that every time you play a mission, you always feel like you can do something better. And I mean that in the best way. It's like you get through an area, and my thought is always, I bet I could have handled that situation differently or more efficiently. And so when you actually do replay it, you end up sort of experimenting and finding ways to get through more cleanly, take out the enemies more efficiently. It basically sort of rewards and supports this type of gameplay. It's not just about surviving each scene or standing back and taking out enemies that come in like scripted amounts. You really have this command over the battlefield. And I think that's a lot of fun because it really just encourages and rewards skilled play.
It is really cool. I mean, Crysis 2, in spite of, I've talked about this before, and maybe I'll get into it philosophically in my kind of Crysis 2 PC remastered video when that comes out. But in spite of it, reining in some of the gameplay aspects from Crysis 1, changing them a bit, it actually has a lot of fluidity of motion and animation that really deserves a lot of praise for the era it came out in, like the slide, the kind of bouncing into a power jump and things like that. It
melee.
Actually feels really, the melee stuff, it all feels really, really good to play, and the gun animations are just top tier. They're so awesome. It's a very satisfying to play FPS. It's really well done.
Yes, absolutely. But I think that's probably where we should leave it for now, because there is going to be more to say about this in the future. I mean, what can I say? We love Crysis here. We love to talk about Crysis.
Crysis every day.
The fact that I don't mind replaying these levels so many times for capture on all these different versions says a lot about the games, I think.
Oh my gosh, I've played just Crysis 1 and Crysis 2. I don't, Steam doesn't even recollect this probably too well, but I easily have hundreds, if not thousands of hours in these games. So yeah.
I don't even think I have Crysis 2 in Steam, just in Origin.
Oh, that's right. That was one of the, it's an Origin.
I actually bought the game on disc on PC. Crysis 2 and 3. No, I got all 4 Crysis games on disc.
Amazing.
I don't know, man. Different times.
Different time, yeah.
But that's going to do it for this video. So thanks for joining me, Alex.
Oh, thank you so much.
And if you guys found this sort of preview, discussion, ramble about Crysis 2 interesting, be sure to let us know. Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, all that good business. And we'll see you next time.